Okay, I think we're ready to start. My name is Deborah Hendrix, and we're here today with Carolyn McMillan at her home in St. Simons Island, Georgia, in Palmetto Court. And today is Monday, June 2nd, year is 2008, and we're going to start with some personal history. So Carolyn, when and where were you born?
I was born October the 30th, 1929 in Macon, Georgia. That's a very famous day. It's the day the stock market crashed.
And who were your parents, what were their names, and where were they from? Do you know?
My mother's name was Emma LeConte Talley, and she was from Macon, and she was married to Ralph Benjamin Shaw, who had been born in Woodville, Georgia.
And what did your parents do?
My father was a brand new employee of the Southern Bell Telephone Company, and my mother, of course, was like all mothers back then. She was played bridge a lot and was a mother.
So she was more or less like a homemaker.
Well, I guess you'd call it that.
Well, do you remember if they were kind of comfortable in their roles? Were they happy with their lives, do you think, in general? Or did they express any kind of different paths they might have, like, taken later in life?
I don't know. I think my mother was more a scholar type, and I think she was frustrated about that. She had graduated a Phi Beta Kappa from Randolph-Macon College, and I don't think, and then I think she came back to Macon and realized that there was no outlet for all that there. You know, women, they played bridge, they went to parties, but I think she was frustrated about that, because one time I asked her why she had never given me really good books to read or anything, and she said, when you were born and you were a girl, I vowed I was never going to put a book in your hands. And she didn't.
But what was the purpose of that? She just thought it would you might lead a frustrating life as well?
I don't know what it was, but I think it was the fact that she felt like, I don't know, that her education was phenomenal. I think she was frustrated about that.
So it might be that she thought her advanced education was almost a detriment rather than helping.
Can you believe that?
Hard to believe. And for the record, did you have any brothers and sisters?
I had
their
one.
Names. And their names.
I had one brother, Ralph Jr., who was born when I was 8 years old. But there was such an age difference that we were almost more like a mother and child than a sister and brother.
So you were the older sister.
Mm-hmm.
And in these growing up years in Macon, how did you spend your time? What did you find yourself doing that you liked?
I was very lonely. Yeah, I was very lonely, and I spent a lot of the time at the library. I would ride the bus down by myself, and I remember I asked my mother to get art lessons for me.
It's okay.
Sorry, my kitty cat.
That's okay.
Come on.
He wants to be in the interview.
Yeah. And she said, oh, no, you'll get that when you're in college, which of course you don't. So I think the thing I enjoyed the most was I would save my allowance, and there were no place that sold art supplies in Macon, and I didn't know anybody that painted or anything, but I would order modeling clay, big things of modeling clay out of the Sears Roebuck catalog, and make figures and all out of that. And of course, I still to this day get real excited when I see colored construction paper, anything like that. Because there was no art in the schools. There was no art hanging in our house, although we were comfortably off. We could have afforded it, but the only art that was in the house were paintings done by my great aunt, who was an excellent artist. And can I tell you something interesting?
Please.
She did beautiful portraits. She had studied in California with the artist Keith, and she did beautiful things. And one day I asked my mother, I said, after Aunt Catherine, I said, all these were done when Aunt Catherine was in her teens and 20s. I said, what did she paint after she married and had 5 children? My mother said, no, after she married, she never lifted a paintbrush, but her children had wonderful Halloween costumes. And I think that tells a lot about how art was considered back then in Macon. Maybe in other ways. There were no art galleries, no nothing like that.
Well,
no art schools.
We're gonna get to that.
Oh, am I rushing
no,
things?
That's fine. And in school, did you have any favorite subjects that you particularly like? I know there weren't any art classes, but did you like English or math? Or
I didn't like math.
You didn't like math? Okay.
Maybe reading. I loved to read. I was a compulsive reader.
I see.
But, well, the funny thing is, my brother said, one time told somebody that when he looked in any of my school notebooks, they were full of drawings. So I guess I conducted art for myself.
I guess you did. So you did recognize early on that you did have kind of a natural ability in art then.
Yes.
Do you think that was even before you knew that art could be serious? Or?
Pardon my head.
Thank you.
Oh, I knew I was interested in it. There was one book, you used to be able to buy them at the dime store, and it was famous paintings. I wish I still had that book. It had Blue Boy and, of things. And that was the one, somebody gave me that book as a child. And that's what made me want to be an artist.
Do you remember who it was that gave it to you?
Oh, no.
You don't remember that. So you had a younger brother. Do you think he had any kind of impact on your life when you were growing up, other than you said you had to take care of him?
The funny thing is, that was back in the Depression, and usually people were only children. And I was kind of jealous because my friends would come over and they would play with him because a baby was so unusual.
Really?
Yeah.
So, you think of families in that era as being kind of large, but you're saying that in your circle anyway,
they were very small.
Is that right? That's interesting. Mm-hmm. I hadn't heard of that before. Well, your parents, did they really encourage you to, after you were going to finish with your high school and all that, were they going to encourage you to go on to like college?
Yeah, it was always accepted that I had to go to college, but to get an A.B. degree, but not with training for any kind of job or anything. It was never come out. It was just acknowledged you had to go and find a husband. That was it.
So it was really to make you more attractive as a wife then?
Right.
to have a higher education.
Yes.
So their expectations were just that you would go to college, find a husband, get married, and live out your life as a...
Right.
I see. Well, how about any of your grandparents or aunts or uncles? Did they have any influence in or encouragement in your, like, say, interest in art or anything? Did they encourage you in any other way?
Well, my grandparents were all dead when I was very young. No, nobody ever encouraged me in that.
And so you've already mentioned that your great aunt Catherine was an artist.
Yes.
Were there any other members of your family that you saw later on that were artistically inclined, or maybe?
Yeah, there were at least two other girls in the family back in the 1890s. They did beautiful watercolor drawings. One of them was named Caroline, and they all studied art out in California at a time when that was very unusual. And later, my mother, when she was in her 40s, went to the High Museum for a little while, and she was tremendously talented. But she quit after a few weeks because she said nobody helped her to haul around all that art stuff. And I wanted to tell her, honey, that's the way of the world. So
she took, this was the High Museum when it was the Atlanta Art Institute?
Well, it was a High Museum school of art.
Was it? So you've already said here that there really, in Macon, when you were growing up, there were just really no opportunities to develop as an artist. There weren't any, certainly were no classes in school. And how about, was there any, say, art schools in Macon that you were aware of? Anything
no,
like that? Just
nothing
no.
like that.
So what do you think, how would you describe the character of Macon? Was it like working class, or?
They had big mills, and then, of course, then they had the middle and upper class people. It was, I'd say, a typical middle-sized southern town, and had some beautiful old houses, and that's the way Macon was.
So you didn't really see something and then become enamored of creating or doing art. It just kind of came naturally. Was there anything you saw in particular?
I realize now, it seems funny to talk about things like this, but from early childhood, I loved things that were beautiful. And I couldn't stand to see anything beautiful destroyed. One example that my family just thought was funny, but my grandmother Shaw lived out on a farm, and of course it took us about 3 hours to get from the farm into Macon, but you would have thought she thought we were going to starve to death on the way. She would load up all these vegetables and homemade butter for us to carry back. And the butter was in a butter, you took the butter and you put it in a mold, see, and then at the bottom of the mold was a flower design, so when you turned it over, there was a beautiful flowers on top. And it really irritated my family, but they finally gave up. I would not let anybody cut the flowers. And so they would take the butter from around the sides until finally the butter was just the flowers on a little stalk. Because I couldn't bear to see people destroy that. And back then, the thing to give children was soap made like figures. I know I had one that was Snow White. Well, I could never use the soap. I just kept it. And then the funny thing was, I loved the roses, the flowers on birthday and wedding cakes. I thought they were so beautiful. And so my mother would bring me flowers. When she went to a wedding reception, she would bring me flowers off the cake, and I kept flowers off birthday cakes and everything. I had a whole collection in a candy box in my closet because I couldn't bear to see anybody destroy the flowers. See? And one day I went in my room and there was a path of ants going to the closet, and that was the end of my
that was the end of the collection.
Rose collection. So much for that.
So you've already said that, you know, your mother expressed frustration because she was kind of pigeonholed into a role, I guess. So in those days, when you first kind of understood what art was and that it was out there, and you've got this book of famous paintings, and you look through there, and what do you think that how women were perceived as artists in those days? Do you think that they were, they were thought of as their art being as valuable as men's art, or was it more like a pastime for women?
Looking back on it now, I realize it was probably considered a pastime. But you see, in my family, it was different. The only artist I knew about was my Aunt Catherine and my Aunt Caroline and the other aunts, and they were all artists. And so, to me, that was a perfectly natural role for a woman. But I was sorry that my Aunt Catherine didn't paint any after she married. I thought that was a great loss.
I'm sure
but
that she...
see, I didn't know anything. I didn't know enough to know about men artists and women artists.
So of course you're growing up and you're expressing all this interest in art and all. And how did your parents, did they encourage that interest, or did they kind of think of it as a childhood fad that might go away and to try and prepare yourself for a more serious role?
They totally ignored it.
Just ignored it.
When I asked them, there must have been somebody that taught art, because I can remember asking my mother, back then, children, you just asked once. You didn't harp on it, lie on the floor and kick your feet and all like people do now. And I wish I had, but I didn't. And I remember asking, can I please have art lessons? As I told you before, she said, oh, you'll get that in college, which of course you don't unless you're an art major.
They think maybe she was kind of putting you off then at that point and just not wanting to encourage argumentation at that point, or did she honestly think you would get art instruction?
I don't know.
Don't know. Well, you've already just kind of described where you grew up, and that Macon was not really a hub of artistic activity. But if you grew up, just say, you grew up in Macon and were going to stay there, what kind of opportunities would you look forward to? You'd work in the mill, you said, or?
No, but you see, my family, that would have been something my family would never consider.
So it would be more of a professional role then.
There was no profession there was your only opportunity. When I grew up, in my families like mine, you got married. If for some reason you didn't get married, you could be a teacher or a nurse. If you didn't want to be either one of those, too bad for you. That was all there was.
So you you didn't get any formal art training certainly before you got to college. Now, what about when you went to college? Did you feel like you were kind of free to explore on your own and seek out art? Or
by then I'd kind of given up.
You'd given up.
And I had the one semester of art appreciation, you know that. But I am so very sorry I didn't even go over to the there was a very famous artist who was teaching at Georgia at that time. I've got one of his books and I can't think of his name right now. But I never went to the art gallery up there, anything by then. I guess I'd just given up.
And so this was the University of Georgia?
Yes.
What year did you start at the University of Georgia? Do you remember?
I went to Sullins for a year first in 1947. Then I started the University of Georgia in 1948.
Did you get a 4-year degree there?
Yes.
You did.
I got a degree in psychology.
In psychology. Mm-hmm. So when you were at the University of Georgia, did you have any like a career path, or were you really going to go the family route and find a husband and get married and have kids?
You know, one time I said to my mother, shouldn't I be preparing for some kind of job? And she said, well, you get your AB degree first. Now, this is a woman who'd been a Phi Beta Kappa and a Latin and Greek major. She said, you get your AB degree first, and then you can be trained for something. I would have been the world's worst secretary. I don't know what she thought I would be trained for at that late point. One time I told her I would like to be a librarian because I'd spent so many hours, in the library. She said, and a look of shock went across her face. She said, oh, you'd never meet anybody or get to go anywhere or anything. See, it was all oriented around husband.
Or was it also like maybe a social kind of a scene where there a lot of, in those days they had parties and things like that. Were your parents part of, the social scene of Macon?
Not real. Well,
did they go to parties every Saturday?
No.
Well, so this was right after World War II, when you were in college. Mm-hmm. What was the kind of mood of the country then? Was it like an expectation that things were going to just boom forth, or do you think everyone was kind of really looking forward to the future? And
the funny thing was, the college was full of GI students, and which meant anybody that had been in the service could get into college, whether they really were college material or not.
And they did, and by record numbers.
They did. But a result that you never do hear talking about is they resented people who made better grades than they did. And some of those men were big and old and mean. And I can still remember one time when they posted our grades, which is not a very nice thing to do, the bell curve. And this man came up to me and said, you expletive curve setter. In other words, I had set the curve up. And I was just speechless. I didn't know what he was talking about, because I did make good grades.
So you were a good student in the University of Georgia.
I had no teachers. Looking back on it, I didn't have good teachers.
Because a lot of these teachers were the enrollment had increased so much that they really weren't prepared for the big class. This is what happened at the University of Florida. So they had teachers that may not have been totally qualified.
I still remember my history teacher that talked about the Egyptians and the Arabs. I mean, that kind of turns you off. Anyway.
So here you are. You graduated in 1948. And what do you do now?
No, I graduated from college in 51.
Oh, in 51. You graduated in 51. So what happens now?
Well, I realized I got very interested in early childhood education. I had taken some of those classes, and I had enough to have a temporary certificate. Well, I made sure I got married before I got out of the university. I married in March of 51.
And so you met your husband in college.
Mm-hmm.
And this was Charlie?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And what do you think, what was it about him that you decided this was the man I want? Was there any one thing, or just...
You may laugh.
No, not going to laugh.
Being a psychology major, I knew my IQ score, and I knew his from the Army. And I knew he was several points higher IQ than I was. And that fascinated me, and I wanted smart children. And that's what I got. It worked.
It worked.
I got smart grandchildren, too.
You do.
But that's not a very good basis for marriage.
Well, it's as good as any at times. So at this point, you get married, and your expectations at that point were that you were going to have a nice family and live happily ever after.
I wanted a big family because I'd always been so lonely, and I was delighted. I always wanted 4 children.
And how many children did you get?
4.
You got 4. Mm-hmm. So, for the record, what are their names?
Della is my daughter's the oldest. Then Jim, James, Charles, and Joseph.
So here, were they fairly close together?
They were born about 2 years apart.
So you had your hands full for a while.
I did. But I taught kindergarten in between children.
Where did you teach? Was it in Macon?
Oh, no, we were living in Atlanta.
You lived in Atlanta, so you went from...
I taught at Miss Wheelis's kindergarten. That was before they had kindergartens in the public schools. Mm-hmm.
So you are living in Atlanta, and all your 4 children were born in Atlanta?
The first 2 were.
First 2, okay.
Oh, by the way, I will say one thing for my husband. He is the first person that realized how much I wanted to study art. And we were living on, he was a very young CPA. And we were living on something ridiculous, like $250 a month for everything. And he paid my way to go to the High Museum.
To take classes?
To take classes.
Is that right?
But I was pregnant, and I was having to ride 2 buses, one into downtown Atlanta, one out, and I kept it up as long as I could. But and you had to carry your board and all your art stuff, so I just had a couple of months there, but that made a big impression on me.
Yeah.
That was the first time I'd ever had any formal art, and I forget who my teacher was, but we did a painting of, a basket with peaches and that sort of stuff. And he said to me, "You've had art before, haven't you?" And I said, no, I never have. So anyway.
That's a good validation of what you
I was
can do.
surprised.
So how did you get from Atlanta to St. Simon's?
Thank goodness. My husband decided to get out of the CPA firm he was with in Atlanta, and he came down to Brunswick to open up as the Brunswick partner for a Jacksonville CPA firm.
See.
We came down in 55 or 6, 55, I guess. Mm-hmm.
And so you had your other two children?
By then we had a baby. I was still, we had one little girl, two, and I was nursing, and a new baby I was still nursing when we moved down here into the world's tiniest house.
Well, St. Simon's did have tiny houses.
That was Brunswick.
Oh, in Brunswick. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So how did you, when you had all these little kids, it's kind of difficult to kind of keep up art at that point. Did you do that at all, or did you kind of take a break from art, raising kids?
You know, I can't remember when I started with Bill, but it was while I was still living over in Brunswick, so it was before 1960. And it was so wonderful to see people that were artists down here, people who were interested in it. Because I can remember, I know I was still living over in Brunswick because I was late one morning going to the art center, and I was waiting, and here came the whole art class over the bridge off to sketch. So I started then. So it was sometime in the late 50s that I started. And of course, and I know, and I couldn't afford to pay for classes, but your mother had arranged with several of the wealthy people on Sea Island to give scholarships. And they were a wonderful thing. And I couldn't go every week. In fact, there were even months I would miss, but when I could, I did. And that was great.
We're going to get into that in just a second, about the art center and all of those activities.
Well, can I tell you a funny thing that happened?
Go ahead.
I know I was going to the art center when my youngest child, I guess it was a baby in diapers. So I can remember one day I went out and put him in the car, put a wet pallet in there. And then somehow I had to go back to the house, and he got out of his car seat, crawled all through the wet pallet with all these oil paints and all over my car.
And that's hard to get out.
Oh, it was awful. I had to wash him in mineral spirits. I was afraid I was killing him.
No.
But anyway,
Well,
I would have to go leave my children at babysitters and things like that to go. But it became a whole new life for me.
That's right. So describe your tiny house here as we duel with the thunder in the background. You didn't have an area in your house that was set aside for you to do art after you started taking lessons?
Gosh, no.
No.
That house was about the size of my living room. It was so tiny it didn't even have kitchen cabinets. And we soon outgrew it and went to another house over in Brunswick, but it still didn't have room for anybody to paint. No, I couldn't paint at home. I had no place.
So, moving on, as you do develop you do take classes and you do go on. Can you describe how your art matured over the years as you started learning more? I mean, certainly it changed from the time you started. Mm-hmm. Now, what do you see as your biggest kind of, I guess, advancement or breakthroughs?
I think at first, of course, you're doing still lifes. You know, he'll set up something, you'll do it, and everything. And then even when I got out doing other things, I can remember just standing there and afraid to make a brush stroke. And Bill would make 2 circles of the classroom. No more, no less. And if I was hesitant about making another stroke, I would wait until he got all the way around and then ask him. I can remember that so well. And now I think, how ridiculous. But that's the way it was. And then, of course, I got over that. And then I was always experimental. I like to try different things. And I can remember Bill one time saying to me, "Kiddo, you'll do something that's really, really good, but you'll never do it again." Why? Well, I like to try different things.
So you really were getting kind of confident then in your abilities to be able to do something like that.
And one day, it was like I was able to do abstracts, and that from then on, that's what I wanted to do was abstracts. And Bill said he was watching me and he could see the minute that happened. I never did find out more about it, but he said all of a sudden I could see that it hit you and you started painting differently, and it was true.
So you don't know, you're not conscious of that memory yourself or that moment? I
just remember that all of a sudden I could do abstracts. I knew what to do. I knew what I wanted to do. It was like something clicked, I guess. That's what
you reached a certain level and...
Yeah, but it had been years and years and years building up to it.
So if you were talking like to another artist, how would you describe your approach to art? How would you describe what makes you, what is your art?
I like to try different things. I like to be experimental. I like texture.
And today, how does art fit into your life today?
Well, the nicest thing is that I've been able to do paintings for each of my children. I mean, didn't do them for them specifically, but each of my children has about at least 4 or 5 of my paintings. And I love to go to their houses and see them and see that they're enjoying them. And then the nicest thing that's happened is I have 3 granddaughters who are very talented artists. And one of them has just gotten a full scholarship to a very big and famous art school. And I'm real pleased about that. And I think through them, I see what I would have liked to have done.
So that might be a good clue then, that for women, things have changed quite a bit.
Yes, they certainly have.
So the art that they can produce is as equally important as a man's, and as valuable is a valuable profession.
Yes, it's changed tremendously.
Do you keep your most important pieces, or do you sell them? To you, that is.
The way I've kept a couple of my favorites. In fact, there are a couple that people wanted to buy, and some of them were for very nice collections that they wanted, and at the last minute I couldn't sell them because they're like my children to me, and I don't like for them. I like to keep up with the people who buy them and where they take them anyway. And I talked to your father talked to Bill about that one time, and he said he didn't care what happened to him after he sold them. He said, it's the process that interests me. And it was, but that's a different attitude about it. And I guess the process interests me, but also it's what happens to them too. And each of my children has several, and now, and I've kept some of my favorites, and I've sold whatever I wanted to sell. And I haven't painted much in the last, say, 4 or 5 years. I've been into other things.
Well, when looking back, there's not really a certificate or a degree that proves you're an artist. When did you decide that you were an artist? What was it for you that kind of put it firmly in your mind that I am actually an artist now? Is there any one thing you can think of? Or did it just evolve?
Well, I know what convinced my husband, who always treated it very lightly. When I first sold something, that convinced him. Wow, you mean that? She worked a little while on that and it sold for a couple of $100. Wow. I guess that's what convinces you you're an artist.
So,
yeah, I don't know when you consider yourself an artist. I think being with the group at the Art Center had a lot to do with it. That's when, you know.
You get kind of an endorsement from your peers.
Yes, and from Bill, of course. From Bill.
So, do you think that for you get more out of creating art than looking at it, or is it kind of a combination of both?
You mean looking at other people's?
Well,
looking at my art? Or
well, do you get more enjoyment out of sitting there and creating a piece rather than like going to a gallery?
Oh, sure, you enjoy.
Both?
You enjoy both, but you enjoy doing it yourself because it's a way of meeting somebody else's mind, communicating from mind to mind about art. Bobby, take an umbrella.
I don't need one now.
Oh, bye-bye.
You take care, sweetie.
Thank you.
Thanks. So, and also looking back, do you think art really enhanced your kind of enjoyment of your life?
Sure. It's been the biggest thing in my life. Yeah.
How did your children, as they were old enough to see what you were doing, how did they think of you? Were they interested in what you were doing, or did they kind of think it was normal for every mom that did this, or didn't kind of took it for granted, or what do you think they thought of that?
Oh, that's interesting. I think they were always positive about it, and I always made sure they had plenty of art supplies and things and my sons particularly took a great interest in what I drew and painted, particularly when we had a life model.
Oh.
They really liked those sketches.
I'll bet they did. So, and we'll just ask one last question before we move on to the Art Center is, when you were creating all your pieces, do you kind of think maybe you were leaving a part of you for the future? Mm-hmm. You think that's kind of your legacy? Or?
Right. That's the thing about it, because otherwise, when you're gone, what do you have to leave? You have your children, and things you've said to them, but what do you have to leave except something that you've painted or something you've written? Or what else is there? And so it's a very powerful thing. Just like what Bill left with each of us.
Well, is there anything you want to talk about some of your personal history before we move on to the Art Center? Or you can always put that in later if you want.
Okay. I think just that, I think being with other artists, with Bill, the art, and it was the hub that my life revolved around for so many years, and it still is. I still have some of my best friends are artists I painted with, and it was the center of my life. And I'm not actively painting now, but I sure am tempted to go back because I get so excited when I get around and smell paints. Things like that. And and also I did a lot of sand castings. That was the thing that I really made the money on. I invented, someone 20 years ago gave me a sand casting that a friend of hers had done, which gave me the idea. It was very poorly done, but I worked on it until I could do very detailed sand castings. And I was in a gallery and sold paintings and sand castings. And I still have people calling me up today. I did that actively for about 15 or 20 years. I still have people occasionally asking me if I will do some more. And so that was a way. And then I incorporated the sand castings into some of my paintings. And that was very exciting to me, actually put them in there. So
that's more of your experimental art
experimental
coming to bear there.
And that three-dimensional too.
The texture that you
which
mentioned.
I had to do, yes.
All right, well, we can take a break here if you
Okay.
want, and we'll stop all this. Now let's move on to the Art Center and what you remember about that. Now, the Art Center was actually built in 1956. So that would have been before you became associated with it. And it was built to accommodate the Glynn Art Association. So it was actually, a building for the Glynn Art Association and its activities. And most people, I don't think, were kind of separated the two. I think they kind of thought of the Art Center as everything, the be-all and everything. So if you can remember and tell us a little bit, how did you actually become involved with the Art Center, and when was that? If you remember.
Isn't that funny? I don't remember it exactly. I just, I don't know.
Well, it would have been was it after 1960, do you think?
No, it was before that, because I moved to the island in 1960 or 61, and I was already studying art with Bill then,
Oh, you
before
were?
then. Mm-hmm.
So before, and how were you? So it wasn't in the art center. Where was he teaching then? At
Well,
college?
now that was, wait a minute. He was teaching in the art center, so it must have been, and you said it was built when?
It was built in 1956.
In 50, so it was sometime between 56 and 61 that I started there.
Okay.
I'd say in the probably 59, 58, something like that. And I don't know, it looks like it should be the red letter day of my life, but I really don't remember. I just somehow was there.
Somehow you were there.
Yeah, I guess friends told me.
I was going to ask you what you thought of when you first came in, but you just came in, maybe with friends or
Probably, and then I can remember talking to your mother and getting a scholarship. And then, to me, it was just so amazing to have this lovely, well, it wasn't lovely, but I mean this big studio, and it was all art. That was wonderful.
Well, did you know that? Did you know Dad then, or Bill Hendrix before you? Or how did you meet Bill Hendrix? I guess I should say, because obviously he has a link to the art center.
Yeah, I guess I just met him when I went over to the art center
Okay.
to take lessons.
Okay.
And then my husband, I guess I met him through, I'm sure we joined the Glynn Art Association, because I can remember somehow my husband ended up as president of the Glynn Art Association, and he and Bill were friends. And so Bill's dream was to have a ball, which just about, and my husband remarked when it was over, he was never having anything to do with a bunch of artists again in his life. But it was very elaborate. I'll tell you about it sometime.
And what other kinds of activities were you doing at this time in your life? Were you was just pretty much family and
We were active in the church. First at St. Mark's Episcopal Church over in Brunswick, and we kept our membership there. Moved to the island, and then later to Christ Church.
And so when you finally, however means, you became associated with the Art Center, how did you see it as maybe the answer to some of your goals? Did you I guess what were your expectations of becoming kind of associated with the activities around the Art Center?
I just loved going over there and seeing the people and being in the Glynn Art Association. I helped with, I know at that, I helped a lot with when they had shows, you know, the first day, what do you call it? When they
Openings.
when the openings. I can remember working on those. I can remember making cider for a Halloween. Seems like we did something every month. I can't remember. But doing decorations and working like that, yeah.
And did you get a kind of a sense of a philosophy that was associated with the Art Center was all about?
Well, that it was just that art was a very important thing. And that to me was wonderful, to finally find a place where that was the attitude.
Who are some of the people that you remember from those days that
Yeah.
you kind of worked with?
I remember your mother. Boy, she really worked over there. And, of course, Bill. And I remember, just off the bat, I remember Annie Lee Taylor and Amy Reed Penn. She was such a sweet person, so sweet. And Charlotte Harrell, of course, she's still around. Ben Smith used to come and give classes sometimes on Saturday. we would have life classes then, I think. And but Bill taught some life classes too, though. And let me see who else. Betty Lowe. Betty Lowe is probably the first artist that I met down here, because before I had anything to do with the art center, when I just moved down, there was a class at the recreation center, and I didn't know then that she had been to art school and she was the wife of the man that was the head of Glencoe. And I still remember she did the most beautiful little sculpture, paper mache, of a mother holding up her arms and a child with its arms. And I thought, that's the most beautiful thing I ever saw, to be able to do that. And she was we had a really wonderful bunch of people painting back then. And I was trying to think of some of the others. Dot Fowler, who lives back of me, came. She didn't study with Bill, but she had learned how to do printmaking in Japan. She lived in Japan for a while, and I took a course there. And I thought, how wonderful to be able to come and learn. She had to learn something. She had a press that was like the one Rembrandt used. And that was so exciting.
Well, do you remember were there any people that kind of worked there? I know that it was a lot of volunteers. You mentioned Gene Strom, for instance.
That did the framing.
Right, and he worked I guess he had his own frame.
He had his own frame shop.
Yeah.
He was really good, too. And what was nice is you paint something, and then your daddy, Bill, would go with you in where Gene was, and they would decide together how it ought to be framed. That was wonderful.
What about some of the other volunteers? Were there more or less kind of regular volunteers that you remember? People that would keep the gallery open, for because there were pictures and paintings and stuff that you would sell.
And they had exhibits, and they gradually added room after room after room. There was always something. Gosh, to tell the truth, I can't remember who. I think I didn't pay him that much attention.
How about any other instructors? You said Ben Smith came and taught on Saturdays.
And Rupin, Amy Rupin taught pastel classes. I can't think of his name. I remember going over there. He was a watercolorist, and he taught metal casting. And I have a funny story about that, because I had been doing sand castings for a number of years, and I didn't realize that the principle of metal casting and sand casting with plaster is very similar. And so I went over to take the class. And gosh, I wish I could think of his name. He said, and it was this big room. Must have been the art center, but it was a big room with a lot of chairs. And I went in and sat down, and I noticed all these men came in, and they all sat as far away from me as they possibly could. Like they sat up front. It's funny, see. Because this was metal casting. It was real humane stuff. And so the teacher got up and he said, well, there's only one person in this group who has had experience with casting. It's Miss McMillan up there. And they all looked at me like, what? Anyway. But that was... Y'all did have very, things like that, extra things like that. That was fascinating.
How about in the community at that time, were there any other places that would teach classes like that you can remember or know of?
Not that I know
of. So, if you could kind of describe the people who were involved with the Art Center, do you think that they were from a certain economic strata or type of personality? What kind of or were they just all across the board as far as who they were?
It was interesting. There were people from Sea Island, of course, but I don't remember many of them. And then there were people, as you say, kind of across the board. Oh, the Garrisons, Mary and Garrison and her husband were very active in the around the Art Center and in the Art Association. They were good friends of Bill too. They worked hard.
And the artists then, were they kind of the same spectrum, or were they? In other words, did they have maybe the leisure to do it, leisure time to do it, or were there people that were working and they did it?
Well, they had a Monday night class, and that was very good. Ken Wallen, who's really done really well now, he sells a tremendous number of paintings and had his own gallery. He was in that night class, as was, he is now painting the way Bill wanted him to back then. And I hope Bill knows he's finally painting the way Bill tried to get him to all those years ago. I laugh about that. And then wait a minute, who is it? The man that's a retired lawyer that's done really, really well. He was in that Monday night class too. And oh gosh, I can't think. Well,
So the Monday night class might have been for people who couldn't get there
who were
during
working.
the day. So.
And I know they had all sorts of interesting people. I know one of the people that was I think he was in the Monday night class, was a young black boy who worked on the yard crew at Sea Island. And he was a terrific artist. And Bill took a special interest in him and helping him.
I believe that was Ernest Butt.
Ernest Butts, yes. I hope he's still painting.
I think he does.
Oh, he was so good.
He really is. So, I just remember that there seemed to be a lot more women than men.
Yeah, during the day, it was the women, of course, because the men were working, and then you would have, during the day, those classes were all women. And I know we had one woman from Sea Island that she was really good, but it tickled us. Her chauffeur would bring her up, bring in her easel, set it up, bring in her paints and set it up. And I won't give her name, but one time your daddy remarked, if she hadn't been rich, she would have been a terrific artist. And I thought that was good. And it was true, too.
So it wasn't that art or doing art, performing art, wasn't considered a female thing. It was just that it was a practical matter, really. The men were working during the day. But you say, what about the Monday night class? Was it mostly men, do you think?
I think so. There were a few. Because I went a couple of times, but shoot, you had a family, you had a husband at home. He didn't want you going off to art classes. You had children and everything. That was great to have that because it was so good an opportunity for the men.
Well, you've already touched on this a little, talking about the metal casting, but do you think that art, the different kind of types of art, or more gender oriented, like you say the metal casting is manly, but would painting be considered manly or feminine, or would pastels be a feminine type thing, or was it that was just not the case at all? It's just,
I think it was both. I think pastels to me have always seemed a more feminine thing. That may be just the way I feel about it. But I saw men and women doing oils and doing watercolors and doing acrylic.
well, what do you think actually makes a good artist? I know that's a pretty broad question, but there are certain aspects that you would have to have a discipline, I would think,
You know
to
what?
maintain it.
You know what I think makes? I think you have to be born with wanting to be one. Because I've seen people who had the money, who had the time, who took lessons and tried, and they wanted to be artists so bad, and they went to college and took art, and they just didn't have it. Sorry. I think you have to be born, well, with the desire to paint, which you develop, and then you have to be born with some sort of the thing that gives you the sense of how things balance. I watched my young grandchildren do it. Like, they know they can design how things balance and how colors balance. It's something that you're born with. I don't think you can learn it. You can memorize it, but I think you could tell. See, I taught a lot of kindergarten art. I always emphasize that, and you can tell the children that are really talented. It's an interesting thing.
Well, what do you mentioned that this was a pretty small area in population when you first came, and an art center is generally considered to be something a larger population would support. How do you think that would even be possible, having an art center in a small place like St. Simon's Island at that time?
Do you know, it's funny, it never occurred to me to wonder about that, because I'd never seen an art center before.
And in Macon, which was certainly bigger,
They had nothing
that's
and
interesting.
no interest. And I think it was all your daddy, old Bill's interest, as near as I could tell.
I think that's probably a pretty accurate answer. What do you think motivated your kind of continued involvement with the art center? Was it just going for classes? I mean, you mentioned that you were involved in some opening activities, which involves a lot of
went to the
work.
openings, and my friends would have shows, and I would. You would go to the meetings of the Glynn Art, and it was just my favorite activity. And then when you went to class, and if you didn't go, people would say, "What happened to you?" It was just the thing you did.
So you had, you were motivated, I guess, by your friends there to kind of keep going.
Yeah.
So.
And I didn't play bridge. I tried playing bridge, and it was a horrible disaster. And I didn't play golf. That was what I did.
Well, let's move to a class here. Can you take us through kind of a typical class? One of your, how did that work? You go into class with all your stuff, you set up, and now what happens?
Then Bill would come in, and he would have his easel, and he would have a big pad of drawing paper, And what was so amazing, he would have something that he was, some weeks he would be teaching you a certain technique, and he would do a demonstration of that and then have you follow it. Or some days you would be studying a certain artist. And what was the most amazing thing about his classes and his demos, if you were studying, say, Rembrandt, he with his little pan of watercolors and a brush, or drawing usually, he could draw in exactly the style of Rembrandt. So you could see. It would blow your mind. And then another day, if he was going to do in the style of Cézanne, he could do a drawing, a painting, just in that style, so that you knew how they worked.
And so the rest of the class would be kind of applying what he was demonstrating.
Yeah.
And would you have a particular, did he bring in an object like for you to
Well, sometimes, I remember one time he brought in a lovely head that was supposed to be Etruscan, ceramic head. We would draw that. He didn't go in much for things like, bananas and things in a bowl. Though he did say one funny thing. He said whenever he smelled vegetables or fruit that were slightly rotten, it made him think about art school, because the still lifes, he said what they used to do is buy the fruit or vegetables and arrange a still life. Then they'd paint it for a day or two, and then when it started to go, they would eat it.
That makes sense, I guess.
Yeah.
So were all the classes, they were not just held in the building, you went out on location?
Yeah, we went, in the early days, we went out more than we did later.
Why do you think that is?
I think for one thing, the students got older. Bill got older. And, I can remember going over to Epworth by the sea and doing the oaks, doing the trees. He was showing you how to do trees. And then in the early days, they did a lot of shrimp boats and down on the docks. And then the docks got where they were too dangerous to walk on even. And I can remember standing on the bridge and painting the boats down there. We went there, and I don't know if we ever went to the beach or not, but we used to go out.
Yeah, and then I remember one time, I think Benny's Red Barn was a pretty popular venue.
No, it was, I don't know about Benny's Red Barn. I never painted it, but I can remember when we went out to the old Frederica Yacht Club, which had been abandoned, but it was still eerie. You could look inside and it was still set up as if people were coming, but it was closed. And we were all sitting out there, been closed for months and months or years, and we were all sitting there with our easels and everything. And all of a sudden, this great big car came and tore around, almost killed us. And we jumped out of the way. And my husband knew who it was. It was the lady that owned it. I guess she just was miffed or something. And I remember another funny time that we were out at, the place, it's out on the island, and it's where you catch the boat to go to Little St. Simon's. Anyway, it was a farm, and beautiful view. And so we were all spread out. And either Bill or somebody had told me it was a good idea to buy those straw kind of mats that people take sunbaths on, and you put all your stuff on that. That way you didn't lose your things, see. Well, anyway, we were all sitting there with our mats and peacefully painting when these cows came up. And the cow evidently started to eat my mat. They got all in between. It was hysterical. So we had to move our stuff from the cows. Anyway, we had a lot of adventures going out painting. Maybe that's why they kind of quit.
That could be the reason. Well, how were these classes structured? By level or by type? Do you remember how, or did they have a particular theme to them? Beginners or advanced?
You would think it would be more that way, but I think it was kind of intermediate. I think he just kind of, he had a gift that he never tried to change people or change their style, though there must have been plenty of times he wanted to. He would work with them at their level, and it was beautiful, and he never made anybody feel bad. I can remember when there was a lady, an older woman, who was doing a portrait of her dog. And the dog was very shaggy and had a lot of hair. And so she was painting every hair on the dog. It went on for weeks and weeks and weeks, every single hair. Well, instead of telling her that really wasn't necessary, he would, encourage her and, looking good, let's put some hairs there. It was great. And then he would work beginners in. We had, one time I never saw I can remember two beginners. One was in this life class, and this man came in with some art equipment, and he sat down, and he spent a lot of time looking at the model, and then he turned out the ghastliest drawing that you have ever seen. It was like something a fourth grader would do, just wretched. And we finally realized he just wanted to come to the life class. Anyway.
Oh my gosh.
Luckily, he soon quit, but he did enjoy that life class.
And about what would this cost? Do you remember? Well, generally, were they pretty kind of expensive for that time, or were they reasonable?
Gosh, I can't remember. But as little money as we had, I was able to afford it, so it couldn't. I think it was reasonable. But of course, if you were having a problem, they would get you the scholarship. That was nice. I can't remember how much it was, but it wasn't all that much.
So what do you think is the kind of key to success? Why did the Art Center continue to go on? Was it the people or the programs, or?
I think it was all of those. The people that loved the artists, and then they loved going there, and they loved Bill, and Bill as a teacher, and it was just the center of everything like that.
And so you say that they were always kind of doing different things over there. Who was kind of running the ship over there? Do you know if there was any one person that, I guess, kind of plotted the course or where they went? Or?
It seemed to me it was your mother.
Well, that's a good segue, because now I'd like to shift, talk about my mini Hendrix a little bit, because I don't see how we can avoid it.
Are you sure?
So you just kind of answered one question. You think Mitty Hendrix was very essential to the operation of the Arts Center.
She really was.
And how did do you remember when you first met her or what your impressions were? I know you said you just kind of arrived on the scene one day.
She wasn't, I don't think, could she have not been working there when I first started?
It's possible.
Who worked there before she did?
Well, those people that you mentioned, I remember Amy Repin and that crowd was there.
But there must have been somebody. Of course, there wasn't as much to run then. It was small. And I think that the key to it is Bill once told me when I said, I love to paint, but I don't like to have to sell and deal with galleries and this and that and that. And he said, of course not. He said, anybody who's creative or is doing stuff, the selling and the money and that is just anathema to them. So see, your mother could handle all that. Bill handled the other.
That was probably a very important key to
I think that's what it was.
Well, how did other people get along with her? She was, like you said, she was more of a manager type. Do you think everybody kind of got along with her okay? Were there any personality conflicts that you could... Oh, we know there were. So, okay.
Let's not go there.
All right, we better. Okay.
I used to... She would get so mad if we got paint in the sink and things like that. And she... God.
But she was not an artist.
No, she was not.
And she never had any
but
kind
she
of background.
admired art. I think she was fascinated and admired artists and realized the talent that Bill had.
So that might have been what kept her so kind of closely associated with it?
I guess so. I think because I remember she was working for the man at Tom Pierce at CPAC, and then she worked at the bank for a while, and then she went to the Arts Center.
Mm-hmm. So she made her presence felt by, for instance, getting after the artists who dump their paint down the sink, which would clog it up, of course.
Sure, which I can understand.
And what other? I know she, during classes, she'd be just kind of strolling around.
She would.
I'm not quite sure why.
I think she wanted people to know for us to know she was there, which is understandable.
Mm-hmm. So is there any kind of stories you can think of that you remember about Mitty Hendrix that are suitable to tell?
I know. I can remember going to a cocktail party at their house, and it was just great. You know, they had wonderful. No, what I was thinking about was things like, all right, like here we were, all in the, with the easels, working away and everything, and here came the bug spray man while we were painting, and he was shooting the stuff in between us. I mean, and it was the smelliest thing I've ever seen in my life. And we were trying to paint, and he was actually, he would shoot between your legs and between you and the easel and everything. And it was making me feel really sick. And I finally went back and said something to Mitty, because I'd known her a lot. I said, does that guy have to come? Oh, you don't want roaches in the Art Center, do you? I said, but can he come another time than when we're painting? Oh, she said. And I really think she did it just so we would know, that it was being done. And then, because she would, and what was something else that, anyway, I can't remember one other story I had about her, and I can't remember. But she was something else. She was rather thrifty too, very thrifty.
It was a nonprofit outfit, and I think you could really capitalize nonprofit.
I can imagine. So anyhow,
Well, let's move ahead a little bit. In 1991, there was a big split. The Glynn Art Association moved out of the building, and that divided up everything. I was wondering if you had remembered that or remembered anything about that.
I was pretty inactive at that time. I remember something about a festival. Anyway, it happened just about the time at our big festival, and I was sorry it happened because Bill got the idea that the artists were mad at him or didn't like him. And I think your mother encouraged the idea. Now, you can cut this out of here if you want to. But and that made me very, very sad because that was not right. They loved him to the end. It was something to do with, I don't know, financial. I didn't know about it. I didn't get into it.
By that time, you weren't really active.
No, I guess I was kind of tapering off then. It's hard to think I've tapered for that many years, but it was.
Well, today, the Glynn Art Association is still around. Do you think they're a good fit for the community now?
They seem to be. I haven't been active in it. I go to their shows sometimes. And they had one of my grandchildren took art there 2 summers ago, and I liked what she did. I don't really know the teachers or anything. No, because I went back, I think one time, when they were having a lunch or something, and I thought, wow, all the people I knew are gone. And that made me so sad. It was a whole different bunch of artists. And
well, that brings me to one last question about the Art Center. St. Simon's Island of today, 2008, is pretty much unrecognizable from those days.
You can say that again.
And when the Art Center was built in 1956. Do you think what happened then and all the artists and what you were describing, painting and classes outside, do you think that could happen today? Do you think there could be?
That's interesting. See, all right, when we moved here, there were it's funny, people didn't know for sure how many people were there because a lot of people, were part-time. But I can remember my husband saying the population of the island was 2,000 people. That's not many people. But I can remember it was all right down there near the pier. Remember? It was, because we didn't realize how little we were. It was lovely. Lovely. And I'm trying to think about that. But see, like I say, all right, that was how many years ago? When I was real active was, say, 1960. That's been 47 years ago. No wonder. And no wonder my friends were dying off, my artist friends. I don't know whether... The one time I went back, it seemed to me they were an older... No, tell you I'm not in the... they have that artist league, or what do they call it? I don't know, I was one of the founding members of local artists. They put on shows and everything. I think it would be more, ask some of them, but what you'll run into is women are working nowadays. I think you've got a whole different situation. Women are working. Teenagers, as near as I can tell, are talking on their phones or watching the computers. And at night, I think men are helping with children, and the working wives are working at night. In a way, it's like it was that sounds silly to say the golden age. It was like the golden time for something like that to happen. I hadn't thought about that. It was perfect because it was the time you had women with free time, men who would just announce at night they could come. Yeah, it may be different. I don't know whether you could get a group like that or not now. They're missing a lot if they're not. I know that. But it was just the right time, the right place. And Bill was the right person to arrive upon the scene.
It was almost like a perfect storm of circumstances.
It was.
Mm-hmm. Kind of a rare, I guess, a convergence of all of these elements that came together.
That's true.
I think we'll let you have any other thing you want to add about the Art Center before we move on to talk about Bill Hendrix.
No, except I sure did love it. And they had wonderful exhibits. I'll say that. The traveling exhibits, and I mean, they would have local art and then traveling art. And then, Bill gave a wonderful series. And I know a lot of Sea Island women came to it, where he used a projector and he would talk about an artist and then show the slide. That was great.
Like a lecture series?
Yeah, that lecture series.
Was that lecture series kind of geared for, I guess, more of a background for the artist to see, or was it general public kind of?
No, I think it was geared toward the general public. I mean, of course, artists it was good for both of us. But there were a lot of, I think, people from Sea Island that came, things like that. People who were not working artists.
Okay, well, we'll shift over here and talk about Bill Hendrix now. You already said you don't really remember when was the first time you met him.
No, isn't that funny?
Just kind of appeared on the scene. And you were there, and he was there.
I don't know.
Well, what were your kind of initial, I guess, must have had impressions of him as a person at first?
I liked him. He was good human. He was kind, a nice person. I enjoyed talking to him.
And later on, as you took classes and became more associated, you worked more closely with him. Did you? Did you see that you really knew what he was talking about, or he was a good artist?
Absolutely. I thought over and over how very lucky we were to have an artist of his caliber and knowledge. And he was, and I don't mean just about art. I mean, he knew philosophy, religion, and just all sorts of world. You could talk to him about anything. He had a vast music. He had a vast knowledge about everything.
Well, do you recall over this period of time when you were there, do you remember what he kind of mentioned about his career path, or how he, where he studied and that sort of thing?
Yeah, I knew. Yeah, he, I think, was proud of the fact that he'd been with the Art Students League in New York, which of course was top notch then. And it was interesting. Sometimes we would get art books, and they would have been written by people that he knew in New York. I remember one of them was particularly a drawing book. I still have it. And then I knew that he had taught at Georgia Tech. And I knew that his mother had been, I think, an opera singer.
She
was a professional.
Pianist. Yeah,
she was a professional in the arts.
Anyway. She was played the piano, a composer. But did you ever talk about Portland? That's where he was from, Portland, Arkansas. Which is a town of about 500 people to this day.
No, I don't ever remember him mentioning that.
How about his parents? Did he ever kind of mention, like, other than his mother? I know he traveled around with her.
I know he traveled with her, and he used to laugh about that he had worked in lowly jobs with opera companies. He carried spears, he said.
How about his father? Did he ever mention his father at all?
Not that I remember.
Did he ever say how he knew, like, how did he know he was going to be an artist as a profession? Did he ever mention that? Or talk about that at all that you recall?
I don't guess so. I guess we just all assumed that from childhood he knew he was going to be an artist.
The Art Students League in New York, which would have been just prior to World War II.
Probably.
He was. I believe he wasn't drafted, but he joined after Pearl Harbor. And so I think that was probably kind of cut that career short in New York. Did he ever talk about any of the instructors that he had that he considered to be mentors of any kind? Anybody that he studied with?
He would mention several. Well, no, I don't think. Not that he studied with, but people who were in the arts, people that he knew in art school more than that.
Knew in art school. So kind of like fellow students then?
Oh, there was this man, and it's a long name, who was a drawing. That may have been a professor of his. I was just assuming he was a fellow student, but it could have been a professor. Nicolaides, I think.
Nicolaides.
Mm-hmm. Nicolaides, I think.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
How about, did you get a sense of, over the years, of any artist that he really particularly just admired over, any of the masters or any of the contemporary?
Isn't that interesting? For some reason, Rembrandt pops into my mind, but I'm not sure why. And I may be just saying things that I think, in quote, I think he liked the drawings of the old masters in a way better than the paintings. And I may just be projecting my feeling on that, but I think that's what he said.
Did he really, was there any kind of contemporary art that, because at that time, modern art was just all over the place. You'd have pop art and op art. And
he told me one time that after I had gone into abstract, that I painted, there were two women artists that were doing similar work. Oh, and I can't think of their names right now, but I looked up their work, and sure enough, it was similar. Wow. So he liked their work. I think there were things he liked about a lot of artists, different ones.
So he wasn't just kind of, I guess, pigeonholed into one area. So he was just all over the board. Do you remember any of the stories he might have said about how the art center started or anything like that?
No, I knew that he came down from Atlanta. He'd been teaching at Georgia Tech with a group. This is just I think, and they moved into, is it like barracks?
That's where what they call the BOQ, Bachelor Officers Quarters, left over from World War II at the airport.
And he started teaching there.
Right.
And then that kind of evolved into the art center.
And you've already said about you remembered his lectures. Did you ever go to any of those like slide lectures?
Oh, sure. As many as I could.
Oh. How about the trips to Europe? Did you go to any of those?
Oh yeah, I went to one. I'm so glad. I can't remember what year it was, but it was. My children were, still coming along. And Mitty said, well, we're going to have a trip to Europe, and we're going to Amsterdam. I think they were going to go in and they'd spend a good bit of time in Italy. And I said, oh, I wish I could go, but this is just a terrible time for me, And she said, well, Bill says this is his last trip. And so I came home and scrounged up the money from somewhere and got somebody to look after my children. I can't remember who. And got on the plane. And I was sitting back of Mitty and Bill. And I could hear them talking. You know what they were talking about? Well, they were going on their next trip to Europe. Later on, I knew Mitty pretty well. I said, Mitty, why did you tell me that this, I said, any other time would have been a lot better for me. Why did you tell me that this was going to be Bill's last trip to Europe? She said, oh, he always says this is my last trip to Europe. Anyway.
So did you feel like you may have been tricked?
Oh, I felt like I'd been tricked, but I was glad.
Okay. And that trip, was it worth it then?
Yes. I was disappointed in a couple of things. For one thing, I had thought we would be going through these museums. We went to Venice, I remember, and we spent a lot of time in the various, Italian towns with the museums. And I had thought, oh, how glorious to go through the museums with Bill and he can tell us about the pictures. And I noticed he would just kind of whisper like this, and these women would just crowd, and, we couldn't hear him, and I'd say, we can't hear you. I found out later that, and of course, they have guides and people in the museums. They want you to pay them, and they'll talk and tell you about the things. They don't want people coming in free and giving talks.
Oh.
So I thought later, I tell you what, your mother was a little on the too thrifty side planning trips. And I think if she had forked out a little bit money, we would have been glad to pay for it if we just known that. And somehow gotten permission to hear him or even the others. And then I think we went to Pompeii. I can't remember if that was, I've been a number of times, but I found out later in Pompeii, you can get into all the buildings where they have a burnt bed and everything, but you have to give just a few like a tiny bit of change to these men that are in charge. We should have done that. But your mother arranged for, and these were not cheap trips. I mean,
I know they were.
But she arranged for some terrible food. And I had traveled to Italy a number of times. And it's pretty hard to get a bad meal in Italy, but we did. and one time, in one of the cities in Italy, we went through this restaurant, and I thought, oh, how lovely. We went out, and then we went into this vacant room next door, which, of course, anything over there is pretty atmospheric. They'd set up a table, and we sat there. We didn't have a vegetable, I don't think, the whole time. We would have pasta with something on it, and then some kind of rock-hard fruit for dessert, and a little meat. Well, your daddy, I laughed at him. He said, these people don't know how to eat. And I thought, the Italians know more about eating than anybody in the world. But he said, we hadn't had potatoes a single time on this trip. And I thought, I'm not surprised at that. But anyway, I must say, she did have the worst menus on that trip.
I am not sure how those were planned. Oh gosh. Well, let's see. How long did you take classes with Bill Hendrix?
Oh my gosh. Maybe 30 years, maybe 30. When did he die?
In 1996.
Okay. I had quit going to classes about 5 years before that.
So about 30 years.
Yeah, at least 30 years.
Well, how do you account for, like, wasn't your one of your grandchildren said?
The child had said, and I said, I've been studying with him for, 35 years. And the child said, you must have really had to learn a lot.
Well, how do you account for I guess, was there anything left to learn after 30-something years?
It's funny, but it was different all the time. And of course, you're doing your own work, and he's helping you. That was the nice thing about it. He helped you in your own style with your own work. And his lectures were different every day. Now, how the man thought up different lectures for 35 years, I don't know, but he did. What is a shame, I've got a whole lot of lecture notes and everything, but how often I have wished that I had recorded his lectures, or somebody it could have been the most amazing how-to art book that ever was written. But
did he ever talk about writing a book about this?
No. I can't imagine him doing that, can you?
No. No, no. And that's interesting because he left a lot of notes. Just volumes and volumes of these notes.
Wow.
So he certainly didn't have a problem writing, but I don't know why he didn't write a book about any of this stuff.
I guess I don't know. It would have been wonderful.
Well, do you think that he had an influence on the direction that your personal kind of art journey took?
Certainly. Yeah. Because if it hadn't been for him, I would have just been a banker's wife in Brunswick, Georgia. Who knows? I might have ended up learning how to play bridge. No, I won't say that, but
okay.
I would have had to do that in self-defense, I guess, because, see, that was my pleasure. The art things connected.
It's your outlet, I guess, for your creativity.
And then teaching the children art. I did that in a number of schools.
Well, what do you have any kind of one thing that you think of as most insightful, I guess, lesson for you that I guess maybe made things fall into place a little bit easier? Was there anything in particular, or was it just a kind of a constant push of things?
No, I think to me I guess the main thing I remember about him, because I've studied with, I've studied at the Phi Museum, a couple of months. I've taken courses with some different artists and everything. But all the ones I ever studied with, and some were worse about this than others, they wanted you to paint their way. And if you drew a seagull like they drew a seagull, you got a gold star. But if you went out on your own and did the feeling of the seagull, that was it.
Hold on. We ran out of tape. I was so fascinated with
that's the end. That's the thing about him that was different
I have another tape
from any other teacher I've ever known.
Okay, the tape cut off, and you were just describing about his method of teaching you.
The thing that I guess it struck me the most was the way, how kind he was to everybody, and the way he would help everybody in their own direction, however they wanted to go. And I had studied at the Phi Museum, and then also with several other artists. I went to North Carolina. I went down to Florida for a number of days. Some famous artists, Betty Loeb taught me into going down with, I think, and we got in the class, and I couldn't believe it. This was he said, all right, everybody get out. This shade of blue, this shade of bright, this. Get your canvas. Draw your ocean like this. Draw your seagull like that. Do a cloud over here. Everybody in the class was supposed to do the same thing. And as near as you got it to looking like his, that was good. If you went off in your own direction, that was just, he didn't even comment on it. And that was the key, I think, to Bill. He wasn't kind to people in the way of, oh, that's such a pretty picture you did of your little dog. It was a kindness of respecting them and how they wanted to paint.
Well, I wanted to ask you this question because I think you already touched on this a little bit. Over the years, there certainly were people in there that no matter how hard they tried, and even though they may have wanted to learn how to paint or draw, that they were just never going to get there. How did he handle people like that? Did he still encourage them to try, or did he say you need to put your brush up and don't come back?
Oh no, he would never have done anything like that. No, he would still, like I say, the lady with the dog with 2,000 hairs. I'm sure he didn't see a great future in the art world for her, but she left there thinking she had the best picture of her dog that anybody ever made. And people would come and maybe they wanted to do a certain thing, they would do it. I think people that got in there and realized, I don't think they ever realized if they didn't have any talent. I think they just lost interest. The only time I ever was out with him, and we were out painting plein air, as they call it now, in other words, outside at Epworth, under these gorgeous trees. And this woman came and joined our class. And she said, after she'd been painting a while, she said, "Oh, look how dirty I am. Oh, I've got this paint. If my friends could see me now, they'd say, 'Oh, you look so dirty.'" And I thought, what? Bill didn't say anything. She never came back. But I thought,
You don't want to get dirty again.
how she thought one painted and didn't get dirty, I don't know. But anyway, that was the main thing for her, was the fact that she'd gotten her hands dirty. So I guess the people who really, well, there was no such thing as somebody that wasn't talented. I don't think he ever thought that.
Did you ever see him in a situation where he was maybe some of his friends from Atlanta who were other artists? Did you ever see those come down, like maybe to visit or in the class?
Not in the class. They came down when we had that big art, the famous art show. I mean,
art festival.
It wasn't a festival. This was a show. Oh my God! With great big prizes, a couple of $1,000s and everything.
My gosh,
it was the show. Your daddy talked Charlie into it. See, and they advertised for entries from all over the country. They had huge entries coming into the art center. Wow. Well, if you mail, and anybody knows when you mail in a bunch of paintings, but if you ship them, some of them are going to get damaged and some of them are going to have their glass broken. And there were all these paintings coming from all over. And these were costume balls.
Oh, is that the Beaux-Arts?
The Beaux-Arts balls. There were two of them, I think. They were wonderful. I was so young then. I have the best picture of me in a black wig in an Egyptian outfit. Okay. It was fascinating. I went in the restroom, and one of my best friends came up to the mirror right by me, never said a word. It was the oddest feeling. See, I was there in a black wig. She didn't know who I was. And I was that, and Charlie was Mark Antony. And then the next Beaux-Arts ball, we were, I have a picture of me sitting on the top of an upright piano, dressed as whoever it was, back in Paris in the 20s, with my skirt up, and he was the artist in a smock and everything. We had the best costumes. Those Beaux-Arts balls were wonderful. And
and so other artists would be there.
Oh yeah, everybody came. Oh shoot, we sold tickets all over the place and everything, and it was just. I remember two people I knew that I thought were very smart. They came as a clothesline art show. The man and the woman, and they held out a line and just had paintings stuck on it. They were a clothesline art show. It was the cutest thing you've ever seen.
What year was that? Do you remember about what year?
It must have been back in the 60s.
I do remember that, but I was too young to attend that.
Oh.
I wanted to,
And we had, because some real well-known artist stayed with us. He left me a painting. I think it's somebody I studied with. I know I studied with Ben Shute, and but I can't think of his name. But that was really big time. But I don't think it was never done after Charlie left.
Yeah, I think this was a very big production.
It was a big production.
Required more effort than people wanted to continually put out.
And the show was at Jekyll and everything.
Oh, wow.
It was something else.
I wish I had been able to go to that.
Yeah, it was worth it.
Here, this is, I'm going to read you something Charlotte Harrell wrote. And this is during the time around 1980 where he would be nominated for governor's awards. Now, I don't know if you recall this, but apparently you must be nominated by, I don't know what the requirements are for how many people, and here's what she wrote. It says, talking about Bill Hendrix, his schedule in which he has taught so many people to have leisure of spirit and wholeness of artistic endeavor yields almost no time for his own leisure or painting or personal life. So I wanted to ask you about why do you see him as never developing as an artist in his own right? In other words, why do you think he chose to be a teacher rather than just being an artist?
You and I discussed that, and I think it was because your mother, as you say, she was the realist. You all had a small children, and she could see this as a way of getting support from the family. And I'm sorry he never had the chance. I didn't realize that the war had cut short his stay at the Art Students League. If the world had been different from him and he had stayed in New York, I'm absolutely sure he would have been one of the leading artists in the country. But also, he was very happy here, I thought. And he loved the people that he taught, and I think he got a big reward from seeing what his students did. He must have. I hope.
I'm sure he did.
But I think he had the time. He used to tell me that when he had something like a commission or something he had to do, that he would get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and paint. And I said, what? He said, yes. He said, kiddo, you ought to try it, because there are just all these creative vibes out there at 4 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, and who would know that? Because not many of us
wouldn't.
But I can vouch that he did do that.
Did he?
I can.
So
certainly.
I was thinking what Charlotte said.
Yeah.
I don't know why he didn't do more big paintings. I think he had the time. He just taught classes in the morning, because he did do those out of town.
Well,
maybe he didn't.
His schedule really was pretty tight every day. He didn't have time, honestly. You'd seen, and you talked about that he could paint in various styles, Rembrandt or Cezanne or anyone that he was trying to demonstrate. Do you think that he had his own kind of distinctive style that you saw? I think there was something that...
I think Charlotte and I were talking about that one time, and she said he did have his distinctive style. I don't know. I mean, for instance, I have a shrimp boat painting he did. The signature, since he used to sign them with any old pen that was lying around, his signatures faded out. But immediately when I saw it, I knew it had been taken down and was in storage at the bank. And I said, my gosh, that's a Bill Hendrix. I knew that right away. That's distinctive, but I don't know whether I'd say I just felt like he could do, I don't know what he would have called his distinctive style. He wasn't abstract in the sense of being totally, abstract expressionism at all.
Well, did you notice, since you studied with him for so long, you'd be right in a position to notice, do you think he had a shift in emphasis of what he thought was important to get across? Or was he kind of more or less consistent?
Well, I know one thing, I mean, this may not be what you mean, but when they first started out, they did a lot of the shrimp boats and things like that. And then later on, didn't.
That's true. So maybe
But
thought shrimp boats would be either commercial,
mm-hmm.
more of a commercial application.
Yeah, that was just kind of the end thing to paint was shrimp boats.
So I wanted to ask you too, and there was a big event in 1978 when Matthew, his son, died at the age of 18.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that impacted him quite a bit. Did you notice any change as far as his professional demeanor or maybe in anything, his art or anything?
That was such a sad thing. I remember that funeral. Was that in 78? Gosh, I didn't realize it was that long ago. That's been 20 years. In a way, he seemed older after that. But then...
So you didn't really notice the professionally?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. And in his records or his papers, he's written quite a bit as a poet.
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever get the sense that he maybe thought of himself as a poet in any way? There's a lot of papers that are poems and things. Some of them are whimsical, and some of them are obviously pretty emotional. So I wonder if he got the sense he thought of himself as a poet.
He never mentioned it. I know one time, but I do know he had written off a couple of the little whimsical things for me, like whatever that little character was that he said.
I can't remember that.
Whatever it is says, don't get mad, it makes your face get red, or things, and then he write, I know one poem or something, and it was very obscure. Now, I don't know if he's wrote any. Mitty asked me to kind of help, help her get them together and all after he died, and I don't know whatever came of that.
Well, they're still there, and one day I'll get to it. One day I will get to it.
Good. You're on your way.
Yeah. And, he taught, I don't know if you realize this, or I'm sure you must have, that he taught a kindergarten class once a week. Did you know that? That would have been Alice Bradford's kindergarten, which was right in the back of the Art Center, if you recall.
I had forgotten. I only had one child that went to Alice Bradford's. That was Joe. I wonder if Joe studied. Oh, he would have told me. Now, I don't know.
I believe it was on Fridays. I
How
think.
Cute.
But he taught for, I don't recall. It seemed like forever. And it was a free thing. He would go over it.
I bet he loved that.
He commented on that quite often, so I just thought he might have talked about that. Okay.
Cute.
So just the last couple of questions here. In later years, how did you see him kind of wind down?
He did wind down. Yeah. I think it was his eyes. His eyes bothered him so, and his vision, I think, was a lot worse than I ever realized it was. Because sometimes he and I would go to lunch at Franny's, and he would pull out his bunch of change and say, "Here, take all you want," or something to the girl. And I thought, oh, come on now, Bill, don't do that. I did not realize he probably couldn't even see to make change. And that made me sick when I realized that. I could have helped him with that, but that's what he'd do. Come on, take what you want. That he was very I think he was bitter because he thought it could have been prevented. I don't know whether it could have been or not.
And I have a quote from a Mrs. Norman Cavender. Do you know her?
No.
She says that she's describing him. He says, artist in the truest sense of the word. Do you think that he thought of himself as a true artist? Or is that, because thinking back, I never really heard him ever describe himself as
I, of course, think of him as an artist in the truest sense of the word, but I don't think he would have ever gotten around to thinking that. I mean,
maybe it just seemed
he
obvious.
just was.
He just was. And I have one last question, and what's your last memory that you have of him?
My last memory I have of him.
The last time you remember seeing him?
We went out to eat. And I can't remember if I took him something. I think I'd made a meatloaf, and he loved meatloaf. But when you're by yourself, you don't get around to making things like meatloaf. I think we'd gone out to eat, and I had brought him a piece of meatloaf, and we were having a good time. It was the first time that he discussed being diabetic with me, because before, in the years past, we never discussed any kind of illness or anything like that. But then he discussed being diabetic, and I don't know if I had found out I was diabetic by then. And I remember we discussed that, and I realized he was really, slowing down physically and everything. And then I think that's the last time. And the next thing I heard, he had died. But I am so glad he didn't have a lingering death. I'm so glad.
Well, is there anything else that you'd like to add?
No, it's just, knowing him certainly enriched my life and changed my life. And in a way, it makes me feel better for the fact that I swear I never had any teachers. Now, this sounds like, well, it must be your fault. I never had any teachers in college or coming up through school, except one that made me memorize poetry, and I appreciate that were, to me, at all memorable. Well, one other second grade teacher that wrote stories. But in college, none of them were of the caliber that I would have even wanted to go to dinner with them. I mean, they were, but knowing him has made up for that.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Oh, I don't feel like did I contribute anything?
Carolyn, that was awesome.
Mm.